Hello and welcome to Finextra. I'm Thea George and I'm here with Dr. Neil Clarke of Volante Technologies. We're talking about PSD2. Neil, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So why is the move to PSD2 and open banking such a big change for banks?
So banks are well versed in complying with regulation, particularly since 2008. There's obviously been a great deal of that. PSD2 and open banking is a bit more of a paradigm shift in regulation, in the sense that it opens up access to banks' accounts to third parties. And for traditional banks, as compared to perhaps some of the challenger banks, this is a big change and offers some challenges to their business models. So this regulatory challenge is going to lead to technical compliance issues, and banks are going to have to find ways of providing access to their accounts. And this is perhaps more of a problem for traditional banks, which are not used to this APIs, although APIs have been around for a long time. They're perhaps quite new in the banking space. And so they're going to have to look at ways that they can provide secure access, comply with the regulations, and meet the PSD2 regulations.
So what options do banks have to achieve that compliance?
So banks, obviously, considering both the technical and the regulatory legal compliance, and I'm not going to particularly touch upon the issues around things like associated regulations such as GDPR, which have to be factored into the bank's decisions on how they comply. But from a technical compliance perspective, simplistically, the banks have to provide secure access to their accounts for the purposes of either payment initiation or for account information services. Now, obviously, the banks, as well as that, have to consider whether they perhaps also want to become an aggregator of services. So they have some options. They can be basically compliant, they can just provide the basic access, or they can offer perhaps more services via API. Perhaps that's a big step for some banks. And again, as I mentioned, they can become aggregators. So on a basic level, they're going to have to implement an API management layer, which is going to provide strong customer authentication capabilities, ensuring that secure access is enabled. They're going to have to enable integration to their back office applications, and that isn't something that is necessarily that straightforward for legacy providers with siloed applications that are built on a batch basis often. And they're going to have to be able to deal with the new data formats that are going to be used within the APIs, typically JSON or ISO 20022 based formats. And again, not all banks are in a position to deal with that as easily as others, particularly some of the newer challenger banks. One of the other issues that the banks face is that there is no standardized definition for these APIs. The EBA regulatory technical standards still aren't officially finalised yet, expected later this year, and banks are going to have to adopt a system which is flexible, and that the APIs may not be of a standardised format. There could be many formats that they could administer, and that of course means that they're going to need flexible integration to the back office for these formats, which may not be consistent.
So what options do banks have to do this quickly with minimal risk while retaining the agility they need?
Based on the fact that the standards, the API definitions are not necessarily going to be prescribed, they need to obviously adopt technologies that are agile and can be adapted to new formats and requirements quickly. So they'll need an agile API management layer. But of course, they'll need to include technology that is very much context and context aware at the back end to integrate to some of the legacy applications that will need to service these calls to and from. So payment initiation and also the account information. So they'll need a smart integration layer really to provide that connecting up of the API requests and the back-end systems that need to service those applications. And they probably need to also bear in mind that for PSD2 and certainly payment initiation, there's going to be a connection with some of the new real-time payment initiatives across Europe. And so that's going to require them some thinking about how they connect up perhaps were disconnected information silos for retail side of things and the payments that are executed. So they're going to have to think about how they integrate that carefully.
Neil, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.